Hey everybody, it's Danny Schur, composer, producer, co-writer of the Stan movie musical. Welcome to Musical Mondays. Today's episode, History, Making it, Showing it, Learning it. Oh man, speaking of history, the Stan movie musical made some this week. I'm coming to you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, center of the continent. The Stan movie musical is based on my successful stage musical originally called Strike. The Stan movie is to Winnipeg what Hairspray is to Baltimore or The Sound of Music to Salisbury. It's like embedded in our DNA. So we're super pumped and proud that Stan is the first Canadian stage musical adapted to a movie to be released in the United States. And also Stan becomes the widest distributed theatrical movie to originate in Manitoba. Regular watchers of the channel will know we've been teasing a huge announcement for weeks, and this past Wednesday it came. Stan will be released right across the United States on December 1st, 2020. You can watch our announcement video from the cast and crew in the suggested videos, and I'll put a link to it in the comments below. So consider this my personal invitation to everyone in the United States, including Hawaii, to join us on December 1st at a socially distanced COVID protocol adhering theater near you. Ticket link in the comments below. And now, as to the Showin and Learnin part of history, Stan is set against the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike. I always say you don't make period movies just to put people in fancy costumes. It's way too expensive and why bother? But what I do say is times change, people don't. And there's just something cool about immersing yourself in a period piece and figuring out, they're dressed different, they act different, but wow, there's something to be learned about today from watching the past. And I'm certainly not into making historical movies because it's good for you or you're gonna learn something. But on the other hand, I do think because we consume so much through social media and through film and television, it stands to reason that if there's a lesson for the present to be had from the past, why not do it? And you know, as a writer, you do all this research into a period and then your head is just full of all these historical details. So I thought I'd share some of them with you because they're fascinating and they have lots to say about today. So here's 4 historical stories depicted in the Stan movie musical. Let's go. So history item number 1, general strikes. So everyone knows what a strike is. You leave work in an effort to secure higher wages. A general strike is a different thing. It's not limited to just one industry. In truth, it isn't a general strike if it's just one industry, but it's when numerous industries, numerous unions, and sometimes not necessarily unionized people, join in a movement which is a larger scale protest, usually over a moral question. Recent examples were the student climate general strikes, where all students didn't go to school in support of the climate crisis. General strikes were around since the 1820s, but the era of the turn of the century to the 20s saw the greatest number of general strikes. The Winnipeg General Strike is depicted in Stan, Seattle General Strike, Germany, and in Australia. The Barcelona General Strike was the general strike that succeeded in achieving an 8-hour workday. And general strikes were such a powerful tool that governments and authorities were freaking out. Remember, it was just a year and a half before the Winnipeg General Strike in 1919 that the Russian Revolution had culminated in the overthrow of a monarchy. So in Canada, a constitutional monarchy, the threat of a revolutionary general strike was imminent, huge, and very feared. General strikes were seen as revolutionary and usually met with violent suppression. What we can learn from the era of the general strikes 100 years ago, with the massive unemployment, layoffs, and furloughs going on right now during the pandemic, is that the quest for economic equity is an eternal one. And the second historical depiction, Eastern European immigration. The 1880s to the 1920s were the period of the largest Eastern European immigration to North America, some 5 to 6 million people. At the conclusion of Fiddler, when they say, "We'll see you in New York, we'll see you in Chicago," that's what's being referred to. In the Jewish diaspora, New York, Chicago, Minneapolis, and in Canada, Montreal, Toronto, and Winnipeg were the sites of most of the Jewish immigration of the time, due to the brutal oppression of the pogroms, or pogroms, mass killing and terrorization of the Jewish population. In Ukraine, where my ancestors came from, it was a feudal system which included slavery until the 1860s that saw most of the population uneducated and unable to advance in society. North America was seen as the land where the streets were literally paved with gold. Immigration agents from Canada and the US fanned out across Eastern Europe, and it worked. Over 1 million people came to Canada from Ukraine alone. And now the Canadian prairies are filled with the descendants of that first wave of Ukrainian immigration. In the movie, Mike Sokolowski and his son Stefan have left family behind in Ukraine and are desperately trying to make enough money to bring the family over. That was a common scenario where male members of the family went to the New World to make enough money to bring over the rest of the family in time. And those Eastern European immigrants of 100 years ago were subject to the same kind of discrimination that immigrants today are. Lesser job opportunities, substandard housing. In the case of the Ukrainian immigrants of the time, having come from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they were subject to mass incarceration in enemy alien internment camps, some 26 across Canada. This long before the Japanese were subject to the same in the Second World War. Our lesson? Discrimination of immigrants is an age-old problem, one as prevalent today as it was 100 years ago. And then the third depiction of history, the Great Migration. The so-called Great Migration was the mass immigration of largely rural black Southerners to the northern US in search of economic opportunity. It lasted approximately 1906 to as late as the 1970s. A little known fact about the Great Migration is that many southern US blacks came to Canada as a result, as is depicted in Stand in the character Emma Jones, who's escaped persecution in Oklahoma and come to Winnipeg.
My family came from Oklahoma 10 years ago, running from lynchings.
The Great Migration was met with a furious backlash. 1919 was also known as the Red Summer, not because of the threat of the Bolshevik Red Revolution, but because of all of the bloodletting, because of the white supremacist riots that occurred in some 26 cities in the United States. In Canada, the government banned mass immigration of blacks until the 1960s.
They up and changed the law. You got this color skin, and they don't let you in no more.
So the lesson here in the era of George Floyd is abundantly clear. The black community has been subject to horrible discrimination for some 400 years, and the Great Migration was another step in the quest for economic and social justice. And the fourth depiction from history, the systemic racism directed towards Indigenous peoples.
You ever gonna take that uniform off?
I've never been treated equal to a white man until I got this uniform. No, I don't want to take it off.
I'm coming to you from Winnipeg, Manitoba. The province of Manitoba was actually founded exactly 150 years ago now by a mixed blood French and Indigenous person named Louis Riel. The story of Louis Riel is fascinating in that it's the only instance where an Indigenous-led movement led to the founding of a territory in the Federation. That success didn't last. The institution of the reserve system with the attendant forced starvation, forced migration, coupled with residential schools for most of the 20th century, a litany of injustices upon Indigenous peoples. All across Canada, Indigenous peoples are vastly overrepresented in the prison system and vastly underrepresented in the upper economic rungs of society. If anyone tells you that Indigenous people today in Canada are not subject to systemic racism, they're very wrong. So that's 4 ways that history is depicted in the Stand movie musical. But I'm going to leave the last word to our director, Robert Adatui.
Well, it's interesting when you do a historical piece and you say, how relevant will it be? I almost thought they had just written it like yesterday because it speaks to what's happening in the political zeitgeist across both America and around the globe right now. In terms of all this fear-mongering, this anti-immigration, these type of dividing people and conquer. We're seeing that in our current politics, and this movie deals with that directly. And I think both the love story, where we're showing people from diverse, different backgrounds being able to become lovers and accept it and move through this journey, it's this kind of stuff that we're dealing with right now today. So it's very relevant, I think, politically, but I think also on an emotional level. Right now, I think people are looking for something aspirational, and you see that in this story as these people confront these issues, but also, rise above them.
The Stand Movie Musical opens on December 1st all across the United States. We hope you can join us. There's a ticket link in the comments section below. And as my goalie helmet and I always say, stand up and stand by.